The scream did not fade. It tore through the night and shattered the thin calm of Ganzhou like glass under sudden pressure. When the noodle shop owner dropped the bowls and ran outside, the alley behind her shop was already swallowing the sound. Darkness clung to the narrow passage, thick and wet, as if the walls themselves were listening. Several people followed her, their footsteps uneven, their breathing shallow. What they found at the end of that corridor would mark the beginning of a nightmare the city would never fully wake from. Xiaohua was lying on the ground, barely conscious. Her body was twisted at an unnatural angle, her clothes soaked dark. Beneath her, scattered across the concrete, was something no one could process at first glance. A mass of human tissue. Still warm. Still real. No one screamed again. Shock stole their voices. Xiaohua was only 17 years old. She worked part-time at the small noodle shop because her family had no other choice. Her father suffered from chronic illness. Her mother worked the fields. There were younger siblings who still needed school books, shoes, and hope. That night was supposed to be like any other. Close the shop. Wash the bowls. Walk home. Minutes earlier, she had asked to use the restroom. The shop owner had told her to stay inside. It was late. The streetlights were weak. The public toilet was only a short walk away, but the alley leading to it was narrow and unlit. Xiaohua hesitated. She felt embarrassed. She insisted. And then she stepped into the dark. Now she was bleeding out in silence. An ambulance arrived. Then another. At the hospital, doctors moved fast, but even experienced surgeons froze when they saw the extent of her injuries. Dr. Liu had operated on countless trauma patients over 3 decades. Gunshots. Industrial accidents. Bodies broken beyond recognition. But this was different. Xiaohua's internal injuries were not chaotic. They were deliberate. Her small intestine had been violently pulled from her body. Torn. Severed in multiple sections. The surrounding tissue was extensively damaged. There were signs of extreme force applied with bare hands. No weapon. No hesitation. No mercy. The operating room lights stayed on through the night. Against all odds, Xiaohua survived. By dawn, the case had already reached the police. At first, officers believed they were dealing with an isolated act of extreme violence. A lone attack in a dark alley. A predator who struck once and vanished. But as the medical reports circulated through the station, something uneasy surfaced in the collective memory of the investigators. The method felt familiar. Just 1 month earlier, in August, a young woman named Lin Zi had been found dead on a dirt road outside the city. Her body had been discovered by an old shepherd returning home in the rain. What he saw under the flicker of his lighter had sent him running, bleeding, screaming for help. Lindsay had not survived. Her death had never been solved. Now, with Xiaohua lying in intensive care and the same unimaginable violence staring back from the evidence photos, the officers could no longer deny the connection. This was not coincidence. This was not random. Someone had done this before. And someone had done it again. And then the police realized what they were seeing tonight had already happened 1 month earlier. The attack on Xiaohua did not exist in isolation. It demanded context. It demanded a map of fear. And, as we trace the timeline backward, the city of Ganzhou begins to look less like a place where something terrible happened and more like a place where something terrible had been rehearsing. Xiaohua's walk to the public restroom should have been forgettable. It was a routine decision, the kind people make every night without recording it in memory. The restroom was only a short distance away, a few dozen meters, a narrow lane. A turn into shadow, and then a return. But the path was not empty. When police interviewed Xiaohua in the hospital, her voice trembled as she tried to hold on to details. She could not give them a face. The light had been too weak. The moment, too fast. She described the shape of a grown man, the weight of an arm around her throat, the sudden pressure of a cord tightening, the sensation of air being stolen from her lungs with methodical force. She remembered pleading. She remembered trying to speak. She remembered the man saying nothing at all. Then there was darkness. Even in her half-consciousness, another memory surfaced, like an involuntary confession of the body. She described a shock of pain from below. A tearing sensation so intense it broke through the fog of suffocation and forced a scream out of her. The scream the shop owner heard. The scream that cracked the night open. Then she fainted again. Investigators listened and wrote down what they could, but they also understood the limits. Xiaohua was 17. Her trauma was acute. Her recollections were fragile. Her description of the attacker was more silhouette than identity. A voice could not be identified if no words were spoken. Still, the police could not ignore the nature of the injuries. There was no theft. No clear attempt at conventional sexual assault. No pattern of robbery. Nothing about the crime suggested profit. Everything about it suggested fixation. What kind of person attacks a young girl in a dark alley, uses overwhelming force, and leaves with nothing except the act itself? We can ask that question, but we should be honest about what it reveals. It does not lead to a motive that comforts us. It leads to a motive that is often harder to prosecute than murder. An obsession. As the case escalated, the investigators began to review everything. Not only known offenders, not only recent assaults. They looked at the geography of Ganzhou, the alleyways, the public restrooms, the unlit corridors behind small businesses where a person could disappear for minutes and be gone before anyone understood what had happened. And then the memory of another case returned, with the weight of wet earth and the smell of rain. It was the afternoon of August 12th, 2004. A light rain fell over the outskirts of the city, turning dirt roads into mud. An elderly shepherd was guiding his goats home when he noticed something along the road, near a small grove and an abandoned-looking structure. A young woman lay on the ground. At first, he assumed she had fallen. The road was uneven. People tripped there. He approached with concern and spoke to her. No response. He called again. Still nothing. Finally, he struck a lighter, holding the flame close to her face. What he saw made him drop the lighter, as if it had burned his skin. The young woman's body was covered in blood. She was small, thin, motionless. Her neck was wrapped with something that did not belong there. Something that could not belong there. The old man ran. He left the goats behind. He fell and scraped his face on the ground. He kept running anyway, shouting for police, as if the word itself could protect him. Two younger men followed the shepherd back to the scene, carrying a flashlight. They pointed the beam at the body, and the reality sharpened into full horror. The object around her neck was not a scarf. It was not rope. It was intestine. It had been pulled from her body and wrapped around her throat. Between her legs lay more tissue, soft and wet in the rain. One of the men urinated in fear. The other forced his hands to work and called authorities. The victim was identified as Lindsay, 19 years old, from a village in the region. She had moved into the city for work, renting a room near where she was later found. Police learned she came from a difficult family background and was working in an appliance store. She had little money. Her phone was still with her, There were no signs of theft. No obvious reason for her to be dead beyond the most brutal reason of all. The forensic team arrived and struggled to maintain professional distance from the scene. They documented everything. They photographed. They measured. They recovered what the rain had not destroyed. Their conclusion, based on injury patterns and the mechanics of what had been done, was disturbing in a different way. The perpetrator's method was not random hacking. It was not a frenzy with a blade. It involved knowing where to apply force and how. It involved reaching into the body and pulling with a kind of grim precision. Some investigators began to speculate that the offender might have experience with anatomy. A medical worker, a butcher, someone used to bodies being opened. But speculation does not make an arrest. The rain erased footprints. There were no witnesses who saw an attacker. There were no fingerprints recovered that could be matched. There was no clear motive that could narrow the suspect pool. Lindsay had not been sexually assaulted in the manner most people imagine when they hear the word. She had not been robbed. She had simply been destroyed. The case stalled. Then Xiaohua was attacked in September. The resemblance in method was too strong to dismiss. The city began to whisper a name for the unseen offender. A name built from the worst detail of the crime. It spread through neighborhoods, through markets, through late-night conversations that ended with people checking their locks twice. And if the killer heard those whispers, the killer did not retreat. After the second major incident, police in Ganzhou formed a special task force. They broadened the search beyond homicide files and began looking for related assaults, near misses, and intimidation events that might share the same behavioral core. Two incidents rose to the surface. The first had happened on July 24th, before either of the major crimes. A woman surnamed Chow reported being attacked outside a barbecue shop while waiting for her husband late at night. She said a man suddenly grabbed her throat, pushed her down, and asked whether she was someone else, a woman with a different surname. She screamed. Her husband arrived in time. The attacker fled into the darkness. At the time, police treated it as a minor disturbance because no serious injury occurred and nothing was stolen. The second incident happened 3 days after Lindsay's murder. A woman surnamed Peng called police from a street in Ganzhou, claiming a large man had forced his way into her home. According to her statement, the man knocked on her door and asked for someone she did not know. When she said he had the wrong address, he accused her of lying, demanded entry, and pushed past her. He searched. He found no one. He refused to leave. Then his language turned crude. He insulted her, accused her of sex work, and offered money. She resisted. She called out for neighbors. He grew violent. He grabbed her by the throat and struck her face. And as the struggle escalated, he clawed at her lower body before running out. This incident, unlike the first, gave investigators something they had not had before: a clearer description of the attacker's build and behavior. The victim also noted his local accent. Based on her account, police produced a composite sketch. When members of the task force saw the sketch, several of them reacted the same way. They recognized him. The man looked like Chao Jiangguo. Chao Jiangguo was not an unknown name in Ganzhou. He had been involved in prior violence. He had attacked a woman in a massage and shampoo shop months earlier, creating a police record that, at the time, had been treated as a conflict rather than a warning. He had a history that marked him as dangerous, not only for what he had done, but for what he might do next. Investigators began building his profile, and the picture that emerged was not subtle. Xiao Jiangguo was a large man, around 1.82 meters tall, physically strong, known for a bad temper. His family described him as spoiled in childhood and increasingly volatile after an early relationship ended. He drank heavily. He fought. He drifted into worse company. He accumulated arrests and detentions. He struggled to find stable work after prison and lived partly on his parents' support. He also had a history of drug use and had been sent to compulsory rehabilitation more than once. This history alone did not prove murder, but it made him a priority. Then witnesses came forward. Two acquaintances recalled seeing Xiao Jiangguo near the time and area of Xiaohua's attack. They described him appearing agitated, his clothing covered in dust, with what looked like blood on his hand. Another couple, living in a nearby building, recalled hearing a woman scream and glancing down to see a man and woman struggling in the darkness. They could not confirm his face, but they said the build and movement seemed consistent. Police also asked Xiaohua to view photos. She could not identify a face. She did not claim certainty. But she pointed to two images that matched the attacker's general body type, and one of those images was Xiao Jiangguo. It was not a perfect case. It was not clean, but it was enough for police to act. They moved to arrest him. What followed was not a quiet surrender. Police surrounded the Qiao family home and placed officers in multiple positions to monitor exits. Xiao Jiangguo had prior experience with detention. He understood what an arrest meant. He also understood his options. He did not open the door. Inside the home, he and his older brother, Qiao Jiangguomin, barricaded themselves. The door was reinforced. Police could force entry, but forced entry creates chaos, and chaos creates casualties. There was also the possibility of weapons inside. Officers did not want a shootout in a residential building. They did not want someone dead before the facts could be tested in court. The standoff stretched on. Days passed. Xiao Jiangguo threatened violence. He threatened to jump. He dared the police to come up and die with him. It was a performance of defiance, but it was also a clue. This was not the behavior of someone who feared law enforcement. This was someone willing to turn arrest into spectacle. On the 9th day, investigators changed tactics. They told Xiao Jiangguo he needed to come down for a urine test, citing his documented history of drug use. They offered a way out that sounded procedural rather than final. Eventually, after negotiation and the involvement of family members, he came out. He was arrested immediately. During interrogation, he admitted attacking the woman surnamed Chao and the woman surnamed Peng. He said it was drunken harassment. He denied killing Lindsay and denied assaulting Xiaohua. He repeated the same phrase again and again, as if repetition could turn it into reality. The crimes were not his. If police had evidence, they should kill him. Then, later, his psychological defense collapsed. He confessed. Authorities announced that the so-called gut-pulling killer had been caught. They released a narrative of motive. They claimed Lindsay rejected him, then failed to meet him again, provoking rage. They claimed he attacked Xiaohua because he mistook her for another woman he wanted to punish. But once the case reached the courtroom, the narrative fractured. On January 6, 2005, Xiao Jiangguo appeared for trial. His attitude was cold. He retracted his confession. He admitted only to the harassment cases. He denied the two major incidents. His defense argued that the case lacked direct evidence, that witness identification was unreliable in darkness, and that the confession had been coerced. The proceedings continued through multiple rounds. One trial was public. Another was not. the sentence shifted. And even as the court attempted to close the file, doubt remained in the public mind, fed by the same questions the evidence could not fully answer. If Chao Jiangguo did not have specialized knowledge, how could the injuries be so deliberate? If there were no physical traces, why was the case pushed to a conclusion anyway? If the story was simple, why did it require so many revisions? Then, another event added fuel to the suspicion. Xiao Jiangguo's older brother died by suicide, under circumstances the public never truly understood. Some said it was drugs. Some said it was family collapse. Others suggested something darker, something that would explain the gaps. But speculation is not proof. And proof in this case was a shadow that refused to stand still. But when his older brother suddenly died by suicide, one chilling question surfaced. If the real killer was someone else, then who took the blame? By the time the case reached its final judgment, Ganzhou was no longer searching for comfort. It was searching for certainty. What it received instead was a legal conclusion that closed the file while leaving the questions intact. After 3 rounds of proceedings, the court upheld a conviction against Chao Jiangguo. The charge was intentional homicide and intentional infliction of serious bodily injury. The sentence, however, was no longer immediate execution. It became a death sentence with a 2-year reprieve, followed by life imprisonment if no further crimes were committed during that period. On paper, the case was resolved. In reality, it fractured. From a legal standpoint, the ruling reflected caution. Chinese criminal law demands that capital punishment be supported by clear facts, complete evidence, and lawful procedure. In this case, key elements never fully aligned. There was no physical evidence conclusively tying Chao Jiangguo to the 2 most horrific acts. No fingerprints recovered from the crime scenes. No biological material preserved that could withstand scrutiny. The confession once given was later retracted. Witness identifications were made under poor lighting and emotional stress. Even the courts acknowledged these weaknesses, and that acknowledgement shaped the final sentence. But law does not operate in isolation from human memory. The noodle shop owner, Madame Ming, remained uneasy. She recalled how quickly everything happened that night. Xiaohua had been gone for only minutes before the scream. She also remembered seeing 3 young men near the road shortly before the discovery. At the time, fear pushed the observation aside. Later, it returned with force. She wondered whether those figures had been signaling someone else. She wondered whether the alley had held more than one shadow. Dr. Liu, the surgeon who saved Xiaohua's life, expressed a different kind of doubt. From a medical perspective, he found the injuries difficult to reconcile with the official narrative. In his professional opinion, the damage suggested not only brute force, but an understanding of where force should be applied. He questioned whether a man without anatomical training or slaughter experience could accomplish such devastation in mere minutes. Xiao Jiangguo's girlfriend also rejected the verdict in her own way. She described a man planning a future, talking about marriage, preparing to open a small business. She could not reconcile that image with the prosecution's portrait of a compulsive killer acting on sudden rage. She did not claim innocence as a legal argument. She claimed inconsistency. And then there was the brother. Xiao Jiangguoman's death was officially ruled a suicide, attributed to long-term drug use and psychological instability. But timing matters. Context matters. To some, his death felt like an answer disguised as an ending. To others, it was another closed door in a hallway already lined with them. We should be careful here. Speculation is not evidence. Doubt does not equal innocence. Chao Jiangguo admitted to violence. He admitted to harassment. He lived a life marked by instability and aggression. Those facts do not disappear simply because questions remain. Yet the most unsettling truth about this case may be that it demands we hold two realities at once. A man was convicted and the law followed its course. And still, the full shape of the truth may never be known. Cases like this do not fade quietly. They linger in the collective consciousness, resurfacing whenever someone walks alone at night, whenever a scream echoes where it should not exist. They remind us that justice is not always the same thing as clarity, and that some files are closed, not because every answer has been found, but because the system can go no further. Because some crimes are sentenced in a courtroom, but their truth remains trapped in a dark alley where no one dares to turn back and look.